Welcome to the Weekly Roar, coming live from the Lion's Den, helping new managers become great leaders and awesome bosses. And now, here's your host, Greg Storch.
Hey there, everybody. Welcome to the Lion's Den. This is the Weekly Roar. Today, another lesson learned in leadership. Hey, I'll be sharing some insights on how we can fail forward and why that's absolutely necessary if we want to continue growing personally and professionally. I'm going to talk about that in just a second. But first, my name is Greg Storch. I'm the owner of Lion Enterprise, host of the Weekly Roar, and the founder of a worldwide bartered coaching program called The Helping Hand. I'm a certified professional leadership coach and a certified leadership speaker and trainer. If you joined us last week in the Lion's Den, or if you caught the replay of the Weekly Roar, then you got to catch my talk about how keeping things simple and focused helps us become more effective and produces better results than trying to do a lot of things and being stretched thin. I also shared 5 decisions that you'll face if you want to make the shift from being a doer of many things to a leader of few things. Now, if you weren't able to join us last Wednesday for the Weekly Roar, or if you need to get caught up, or maybe you just want to watch that session over again, you can access my free video resources on my website at lion-enterprise.com. On the homepage, just click on the Lion's Pride Library and find video number 135 for last week. Hey, and while you're in the Lion's Pride Library, make sure you look around and stay a while. It's a free resource, and it's a great way for you to get more of the roar. Okay, it's time to get today's topic started, and I'm calling this lesson learned, we all make mistakes, don't we? During my Effective Thinking series, I spoke about realistic thinking. Realistic thinking is something that allows leaders to not just be positive about the future, but also remain grounded in the reality of the situation. The reason I bring this up is because what I'm talking about today has a direct relationship to realistic thinking, and that's how it relates to being able to see not just all the great things, but also all the mistakes that are happening as well. When we place our focus on all the things that are going right and push aside those things that are going wrong, it just sets us up for the blind side. And if there's anything that can be detrimental to a leader's credibility, it's being blindsided. The thing is, when we get into a pattern of believing that everything's going well, we miss the potential problems. That's when they sneak up on us and, yep, you got it, blindside us. Let me share this with you. And if you're in a leadership position, I want you to write this one down. It's that important. And that is, the biggest mistake that we can make as leaders is to not ask what mistakes we're making. And here is where I make the link between this and realistic thinking. Hey, you know me. I'll be the first one to admit that I've made my fair share of mistakes. I've learned so much from my mistakes, and I'm thinking about making a few more. I know this is going to come as a complete shock to all of you, but the truth is, we all make mistakes, don't we? But I would also say that we are at a point in our lives where we understand the important role mistakes make. If you want to, you can replace mistakes with failures. And we all know how important it is for us to embrace failures. The word itself, it has negative connotations to it. So we're automatically programmed to think negatively about failures and mistakes. But the thing is, if we don't acknowledge our mistakes, we keep ourselves from growing both personally and professionally. It was George Bernard Shaw who said, "A life spent making mistakes is not only more honorable, but more useful than a life spent doing nothing." So here's the thing. We don't need to spend our time learning how not to fail. That's just a waste of time. Oh, we're gonna make mistakes. But the thing is, not the number of mistakes we make, but how many times we repeat the same one. If we aren't learning and growing from life's setbacks, from making mistakes, then we're never going to get anywhere. What we have to do is learn how to fail successfully. By doing that, by learning to fail successfully, we can learn to handle the mistakes we do make and maximize the benefits we get. This is something I've always told people I lead. Years ago, I decided to abandon having a zero defect mentality. A zero defect mentality is based on the premise that perfection actually exists. And as a leader, it's a great setup for a big fall. When we have the expectation of others and even ourselves that we shouldn't be making mistakes and that everything should result in perfection, we just set ourselves up for more failure. So I always told my people that I expect them to make mistakes. I embraced realistic thinking, knowing that mistakes were going to happen. But with that said, I also expected them to learn from those mistakes. So I would also tell them that it's okay to make mistakes. I just don't want them making the same one. It's not a mistake to make a mistake, but it's a mistake to make the same one. I love this quote by author of The Alchemist, Paulo Coelho. Every time we make the same mistake, the price goes up. For leaders, not only does the price go up, but confidence in our ability to lead goes down. So I want to share 5 things that you'll need to be doing if you want to fail successfully. Listen to these and see how many you're already doing and how many you may need to start doing to get better at learning from your mistakes. Now, like everything, it always begins with you first. So the very first thing we have to do in order to fail successfully is to acknowledge our own mistakes and weaknesses. I know it's hard to believe we're fallible, but it's true. There was a time in my career that I believed leaders should put up this strong front and appear confident in front of their people. I didn't want anyone to see my weaknesses or when I made mistakes. But what I've learned is that when leaders act like they're flawless, that they're perfect, it actually makes them unrelatable. Nobody can relate to perfection because nobody's perfect. One of the best things we can do is to acknowledge our mistakes. It makes us so much more relatable as leaders when our followers can see we're not perfect either. The problem with my previous thinking is that it was based on the assumption that my followers weren't aware of my weaknesses or didn't see my mistakes. But I'm here to tell you, nothing is further from the truth. Believe me, they know. When we have the ability to admit our weaknesses and front up on our mistakes, it doesn't come as a surprise to our followers. It actually serves as a reassurance to them. Taking a realistic look at yourself and admitting your weaknesses is the first step in anticipating mistakes and learning from the ones you do make. Whenever we aren't getting the results we want, either personally or professionally, it's important that we look inward first. Did we do everything right to ensure success? More than likely, you'll find that you contribute almost as much to the problem as your people do. Admitting our failures and taking responsibility for them allows us to go to the next step. Now, the second thing you need to do if you want to fail successfully is to understand that mistakes are the price of progress. I mentioned earlier how important it is that we view failure as a healthy, inevitable part of the process along the road to success. Nothing is perfect, and that includes us, but don't take it personally. That's just the way it goes. You know, in the NFL, after teams play a game, whether they end up winning or losing, they all find themselves in the room the following week reviewing the tapes of the game. What are they doing? Well, they aren't just looking at what worked. They're also looking at all their mistakes so they can learn from them and not repeat them. Even the winning team makes mistakes. The only choice they have to get better is to identify them and do better next time. You know, one of the oldest quarterbacks in the NFL right now is Drew Brees, who plays for the New Orleans Saints. That's my wife's team, and so we watch them play quite frequently. Drew Brees holds almost every quarterback record out there, including career passing yards with over 79,000 during his career. Is Drew Brees' success because he never makes mistakes? Well, of course not. I've seen him make plenty of them. He makes mistakes every time he takes the field. But the thing about the leader of the New Orleans Saints is that he learns from them and he knows he makes them and he doesn't repeat them. You don't have to be a professional football player to understand the power of learning from your mistakes. The key is to confront them and not take them personally. If you want to reach your potential as a leader, expect to make mistakes and fail. Now, this next thing is really important. It falls under the category of evaluated experience. Julius Caesar is attributed with the earliest version of the expression, experience is the best teacher, when he said, experience is the teacher of all things. But my mentor, John C. Maxwell, made a great point that experience isn't the best teacher. Evaluated experience is the best teacher. What he means is that if we don't take the time to go back and review our mistakes, we'll fail to take the lesson away from it. It's not the act of going through the mistake that gives us the experience. It's going back and grabbing that lesson from it that helps us to grow and improve. And so the third thing you must do in order to fail successfully is to learn from your mistakes. You know, most people could learn from their mistakes if they weren't so busy trying to deny them. When it comes to failures, people tend to have a flight or fight response. Some will hesitate to make mistakes because it makes them feel inferior, while others embrace mistakes. They learn from them and become superior. It's all about growth. We can either run from our mistakes, which plenty of people do, but that just ends up hurting us more, or we can learn from them and help ourselves. When we run from our mistakes, we don't learn from them and we set ourselves up to surely repeat them over and over again. But if we put forth the effort to learn from them, we can break the cycle and avoid repeating them in the future. Wisdom very seldom comes from success as much as it does from failure. Remember, this is just like in the field of science. Mistakes always come before the discovery of truth. And this is why it's important that we take time to evaluate our experiences, good and bad, so we can learn the lesson given in the experience. My success as a program manager came in large part because I surrounded myself with strong leaders who oversaw the success of the task orders we were given. Every morning after briefing our federal customer, I would stay back and hold a manager's morning meeting with those leaders. And we would discuss the challenges ahead in the days and the weeks coming up. And many times they were looking for me to provide them with guidance. The thing is, these leaders were on the front lines. They were the ones who were closest to the challenges in their respective areas. And I have to attribute a lot of my success to having enough humility to be able to rely on them before making my decisions. So one of the most important things I ever asked the team of leaders was this one simple question: what am I missing? It's easy to make decisions based on the things we know, but the fact is that there's plenty we don't know. We can set a direction based on what we see, but what about the things we don't see? These are the things that tend to blindside us. So one of the best ways to navigate the things you don't know or the things you don't see is to rely on others and ask the question, what are we missing? Ask that question and it grabs people's attention, forcing them to take pause and think. When we do that, it helps us to skip over the obvious things and start seeing the not so obvious things. It also helps us to think more realistically and avoid assuming that everything is perfect. If we don't ask the question and force others and ourselves to stop and think into it, we avoid making decisions based on assumptions and the false pretense that everything is perfect. And that, my friends, just isn't reality. Which brings me to the fifth and final thing that you must do to fail successfully. While I surrounded myself with other leaders who could help me see the things that were in my blind spots, I also had to create a culture where they felt comfortable challenging me and speaking up. So the fifth thing is that you must give permission to push back. One of the worst things that we can do is quiet the voices of those we lead by creating a culture where they don't feel like they can pipe up. Fear plays a big part in this. As I always say, fear is the great paralyzer. And in this case, fear of making a mistake or fear of speaking up can lead to hurting the team or even the organization. Some of the best leaders I know have paved the way for their followers to speak up and share their opinions. Without the honest input of others, it's a surefire way to lead to disaster. You know the saying that two heads are better than one? Well, it's true. And the more heads you have focused on the issue, the better the chances are for a successful outcome. As long as everyone on the team feels like they can speak up and say what needs to be said. Don't be a leader who tries to avoid bad news. Be a leader who invites it. You do that by giving permission to those closest to you to ask the hard questions and give their opinions when they may not agree with what you're doing. That requires that you take that nice little ego of yours, wrap it up, and stick it over there. If you're leading people, then be sure you give them your permission to ask hard questions and push back on your ideas when needed. And that's a permission that has to be given to them by you. And you want to make sure that this is happening on the front end instead of the back end. Because you see, if everyone is quiet when the decisions are being considered, it won't be very quiet once it all plays out. We can avoid that simply asking one thing: what mistake am I making? So there are the 5 things that you must do if you want to fail successfully. Let me give you a real quick recap. First, admit your own mistakes and weaknesses. Everything always begins with us first. Second, accept the fact that mistakes are the price tag of success. You're going to have to make mistakes if you expect to move forward successfully. The third thing was learn from your mistakes. Evaluate your failures and mistakes so you can learn from them and avoid repeating them in the future. The fourth thing was be willing to ask that golden question. What are we missing? The more minds you have working towards success, the greater the chances are you'll find it. And then the last thing, the fifth thing, is don't forget to give your people permission to push back up front, creating a culture where people feel safe in challenging the leader to avoid making mistakes. Create a culture where people feel safe in challenging the leader to avoid making mistakes. There's one thing I know that's certain, and not many things are, but when it comes to making mistakes, I can guarantee that all of us have and will continue to make them. It's all part of the human experience, but what isn't certain is what happens as a result of the mistake. It takes intentional actions to fail successfully. And I just shared 5 things you must do if you want to end up on the right side of a wrong decision. Theologian Tyrone Edwards told us, some of the best lessons we ever learn, we learn from our mistakes and failures. The error of the past is the wisdom and success of the future. For positive leaders, it can be easy to take for granted that everything is fine. They don't look for problems because they don't expect to have any. And when something does happen, they get blindsided and then they're left wondering what happened. Trust me when I tell you that it won't take many blindsides before they learn that the biggest mistake that they can make as a leader is not asking what mistake they're making. We all make mistakes, don't we? And if you want to become a better leader, understanding this fact of life will help you do that. Mistakes have the power to make us into something better than we were before, but we have to be willing to acknowledge and learn from them. Do this, and you'll be well on your way to failing successfully. All right, everyone, that does it for me again today. And I want to invite you to come on back and join me next week as I share one of the biggest challenges that we can face as a leader and how we can get our arms around what's holding us back. That's right. Next week, we're going to be talking about the oxymoron that is time management. Want to keep running to the roar? Just come on back to the Lion's Den next Wednesday at 11 a.m. Eastern Time and join me for the weekly roar. I want to take a second because we have Christmas coming up in just 2 more days. So if you celebrate Christmas, Merry Christmas to you and yours. I want to thank you again for joining me today. I appreciate you. And until we meet again next Wednesday, remember, be powerful, but stay poised just like a lion. Bye, everybody.
Thanks for watching the Weekly Roar live event at lionenterprise.com. If you enjoyed this video, please tell others to join us each week here in the Lion's Den. Thanks again, and see you next week.